One good evening. Today's Monday, July 25th, 2022. I don't think anybody could confuse this with January outside. Anyway, I'd like to call our meeting to order and ask if you all could please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
United States of America, and to the republic which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
All right, Madam Clerk, will you call roll, please?
Yes, Ms. Conley,
Here.
Mr. Duncan,
Here.
Ms. Hardy,
Here.
Ms. Leon,
Here.
Ms. Shantz Hiscod,
Here.
Mr. Snyder,
Here.
and Mayor Tarter.
Here.
And we do have two members participating electronically, so we need to do the motions for that. We have Ms. Hardy and Ms. Snyder. Mr. Snyder.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I move that the City Council approve electronic participation by Letty Hardy in tonight's meeting for personal reasons pursuant to the City Council's policy on participation in meetings through electronic means adopted by Resolution 2022-02.
All right. Ms. Hardy, could you state where you are and the reason for your absence?
I am in Waitsfield, Vermont on family vacation.
Okay. Madam Clerk?
Was there a second?
Oh, I'm sorry, we didn't have a second yet.
Second.
We have a second.
Ms. Conley,
Yes.
Mr. Duncan,
Yes.
Ms. Leon,
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscod,
Yes.
Mayor Tarter.
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you, Council.
Thank you. Do we have a similar motion for Mr. Snyder?
Mr. Mayor, I move for electronic participation by Councilmember Snyder.
All right. Mr. Snyder, can you state the location you're at and the reason for your absence?
Chautauqua, New York, with family.
Okay. Second.
Second the motion.
Mr. Snyder or Mr. Duncan on the second. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley,
Yes.
Mr. Duncan,
Yes.
Ms. Hardy,
Yes.
Ms. Leon,
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscod,
Yes.
Mayor Tarter.
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you, Council.
All right. Thank you. And let's move on to adoption of the meeting agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt the meeting agenda.
All right. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. We have a tie and second. The tie goes to Ms. Leon. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Abstentions? The ayes have it. And we have one proclamation this evening. It's a proclamation declaring July 2022 as Disability Pride Month. And I believe Ms. Hiscott is going to do the honors.
Thank you. Whereas on July 26, 1990, the United States Congress enacted the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. And whereas the ADA is an extension of the civil rights movement and a fundamental civil rights law in our history, ensuring the civil rights of citizens with disabilities. And whereas, as the first of its kind comprehensive declaration of equality for people with disabilities, the ADA enables millions of people to participate in society while being protected by federal law from discriminatory practices. And whereas, in honor of the passage of this landmark protection, Disability Pride Month is observed jointly with the anniversary of the ADA in July, with 2022 being the 32nd anniversary of this observance. And whereas Disability Pride Month builds upon the celebration of the law by celebrating something just as important, the visibility, contributions, and accomplishments of the disability community. And whereas Disability Pride empowers those with disabilities to define their own identity, breaks down stigma and stereotypes of those with disabilities, and serves as a tool to tackle the ableism that persists to this day. And whereas the City of Falls Church strives for inclusion and values the neurodiversity and disability within the city. And whereas we value our community members with disabilities and the city celebrates its history, community character, and cultural diversity. And whereas we recognize that to reach the city's 2040 vision of being a vibrant, walkable, safe, small city in Northern Virginia that keeps pace with regional growth while strengthening our identity as a special place, there is much work to be done, and we need input and participation for all.
Now, therefore, I, David Tarter, Mayor of the City of Falls Church, Virginia, do hereby proclaim the month of July 2022 as Disability Pride Month in the City of Falls Church, and urge all to respect and honor our diverse community and celebrate and build a culture of inclusiveness and acceptance. So, and we do have our newest employee, who I might invite down to accept this proclamation if she's so inclined, Maggie Redden, who's also, I understand, a para-Olympian, if that's accurate. Fantastic. So we'd love to have you come down. You're certainly welcome to say anything if you'd like, or at a minimum, maybe just come down for a photo, and we can present this proclamation to you on behalf of everyone. Let's come on down. Yeah, we can all come down this way. Should we do the picture back here? Yeah,
I think so. I think it'll be fine, yeah.
Okay, let's do that. So, why don't we scooch, should we even, how many people we got? Let me scooch right here. Okay. All right. How's this section? Can you see it as well?
Okay, I'll be the first one, if that's all right.
Try to get an angle where I can get around the table here.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, I think I'm good.
Stand by.
Give me just a second.
And then this is Maggie's husband.
Yes, Dave is Dave. Yeah.
Oh, yes, I'm so hoping that you're keep your good face on. You know, this is nice to have her down here for proclamation.
Look at me smile. You don't feel in the mood to smile.
Thank you so much. Congratulations. Welcome aboard.
Been a month, right?
Almost 2 months.
Oh, you'd already been there a month. That's a month. Summer of fun.
All right, Madam Clerk, do we have any oaths of office to administer today?
We do not. Thank you.
Okay, and let's move on to receipt of public comments. Would you start with summary of written comments?
Yes, sir. David Beto from the Spectrum Building requested flashing speed lights along West Broad Street to prevent speeding and red light running. Sarah Belden provided comments on traffic calming and pedestrian safety and advocated for sidewalks where there are none and easy, safe walking access to playgrounds, particularly in the Rosemary Lane area. The following asks for evidence-based traffic calming measures to increase pedestrian safety on West Rosemary Lane. We have Sonia Ruiz Bolaños of 102 West Rosemary Lane and Ricardo Bolaños from the same address. Ann Wanlin from 1208 Seton Lane. Derek Brand from the same address. Ann Brady, 402 West Rosemary Lane, and Andrew Myers from that address. Marie Payne and Tanner Payne from 206 West Rosemary Lane. Sarah Koenig and Alex Koenig from 407 West Rosemary Lane. Madeline Lautenbach and Claudio Hayes from 404 West Rosemary Lane. Lindsay Covey and Justin Covey from 401 West Rosemary Lane. David Wells and Maggie Wells from 406 West Rosemary Lane. Chris Sauer and Caroline Sauer from 409 West Rosemary Lane. Rebecca Jackson and Randall Allen from 302 West Rosemary Lane. And Rowan Shaloub and Darren Pauley from 316 West Rosemary Lane. Allison Brown and Gardner Humphreys of 706 Poplar Drive wrote to support the addition of policies and actions to promote housing alternatives such as accessory dwelling units and missing middle housing options, and requested the addition of those to the City Council work plan. Sean Deca provided information about using asphalt art projects for traffic calming. Dick Doyle of 304 Great Fall Street wrote to ask that dogs be prohibited from the community center tennis courts as they have left unsanitary conditions for tennis players. Naomi Lipsky of 410 South Maple Avenue wrote about poor lighting conditions at the East Falls Church Metro Station. W. Frederick Thompson of 502 West Broad Street provided council with comments from the Broadway Condominium T-Zone Task Force to the Environmental Sustainability Council regarding proposed transition zones. And Paul Rothstein provided several emails with questions, concerns, and comments about the proposed Virginia Tech property actions before council for a public hearing tonight, and asked that the item be tabled until his questions are answered and independent appraisals of the property are received.
All right.
Oh, and I think there was one more. Ms. Hardy forwarded an email from Cy Surratt regarding parking issues on Westmoreland Road, and I believe Ms. Hardy did respond to Dr. Surratt.
All right. Is that it for the written comments?
That is.
Okay, thank you so much. So now we're going to move on to the receipt of public comments. Anyone who wishes to speak now is certainly welcome to do so. We would ask that you state your name and address for the record and keep your comments to 3 minutes. Madam Clerk, will you call the first speaker?
That was me. Excuse me for that echo.
Okay.
Yes, we have Mr. Paul Rothstein signed up to speak remotely.
All right, welcome, Mr. Rothstein.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to the Falls Church City Council. I'm also speaking tonight on behalf of community members Cheryl Sim, Nancy McFalls, and Adrian White. Tonight I address my comments to Mayor Tarter. I do not believe in surprises, so I have sent these comments to the City Council ahead of time, and people listening can read the comments at tinyurl.com/Falls Church Issues. That's one word, tinyurl.com/Falls Church Issues. Mayor Tarter, you have been a named partner in commercial real estate law firms for the last 25 years. In your LinkedIn profile, you wrote, quote, "My career as a lawyer specializing in land use prepared me for public life. It taught me how business and residents can work in harmony to create an ideal environment with better economic opportunity, happier homes, greener spaces, safer streets, and better educated children." Let's say a client came to you and gave you details like the following. I'm involved in a land transaction. While I own 70% of the land, I will get only 33% of the money from the transaction. The other party has an option to buy the land for $3 million, but they can only use the land for government and educational purposes and can't use it for mixed-use purposes, which is the popular use for such successful projects today, like the Mosaic District. They also have lease rights for the next 13 years, but they're planning to leave the site. Also, several years ago, they bought out another party for the equivalent of 33% of the current proposed price. So each of these entities, one of which never had any ownership of any land at all, will get about a third of the amount, unquote. I believe that gather all the facts, ask the client why there was a disparity, tell the client that the fact that one party bought out another entity years ago is irrelevant to the current transaction, and advise the client to get independent appraisals of not only the total land value, but of the worth of your client's share. Based on the independent appraisals, you would negotiate terms. If you disagree with any of those statements, please explain at the council meeting. And if that's the advice that you would give to your private client, I believe that you should give the same benefit to your constituents. I urge you to table tonight's vote until you get independent appraisals about the total value of the land and Falls Church City share. As you know, the city clerk informed me of the following in the past week, and this is her quote. City Manager Wyatt Shields has advised me that he misspoke at the April 11, 2022 City Council meeting that you referenced, and an appraisal for the property does not exist because it was never created. Mr. Shields asked me to tell you that an independent commercial real estate advisor provided him with information regarding the value of the property, which is contained in a single spreadsheet. The city has chosen to withhold the approximately 10-page spreadsheet in accordance with Virginia Code Section 2.2-3705.7.2 as working papers of the city manager, unquote. To repeat, an appraisal for the property does not exist because it was never created. If you don't feel that an appraisal is advisable, please explain why. To my knowledge, and please correct me if I'm wrong, this error was not publicly known until I
That's
received
3 minutes.
Okay, are you going to cut me off?
If you can speak a bit longer, but the time limit is 3 minutes. So if you continue, but attempt to wrap it up if you can, coming up here.
Well, you've seen my comments, so you know at the end I'm asking you to determine if Falls Church violated the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. If that discussion makes you uncomfortable, you can cut me off. To continue, in a separate email on which I've CC'd you and which listeners can find at tinyurl.com/fallschurchissues, I explain why the current language at section 4C of the proposed contract between Converge and the City of Falls Church is problematic. I ask you to instruct outside counsel and Mr. Shields to answer the questions that I posed on July 11th. And those are noted in my prior email. Also, to get back to the prior comment, if you have an appraisal and if the city is entitled to more money, it can use that money to improve pedestrian access on Haycock Road, which will benefit both school children and others accessing the Westfall's project, as well as your immediate neighbors in Fairfax County. I also ask you to instruct council to determine if Falls Church City's response to my May 25th request violated section 2.2.
Sir, that's 4 minutes.
-3704B of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. I requested the letter of intent, which I only guessed existed, and CC'd Mr. Shields, who signed the term sheet on March 29th, almost 2 months before. I've uploaded my correspondence to tinyurl.com/fallschurchissues. The city did not disclose the letter or inform me of its existence and give a reason for withholding the document. Only after I asked again on June 28th did the city disclose it to me. That letter had the same language for section 4C that I'm questioning now, and my ability to address the issue in a timely manner with the community, the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, and the Falls Church City Council and Planning Commission was prejudiced as a result. I am not a subject matter expert in FOIA, but I believe, as I hope you do, that it is necessary for this question to be answered and for remedial action to be taken to ensure future compliance if the City of Falls Church did not comply with the law. To conclude, I urge you, consistently with your LinkedIn description and your position as mayor, subject matter expert, and member of the bar, to address these issues now so that the people of the area can have, to use your words, an ideal environment with better economic opportunity, happier homes, greener spaces, safer streets, and better educated children. Thank you for the opportunity to speak before the Falls Church City Council.
Okay. Thank you for your comments, sir. Madam Clerk, is there any other speakers for tonight's matter?
I don't have any speaker slips right now. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. So let's move on now to council requests. Are there any council requests? Ms. Conley?
I have one, and it relates to the work session discussion from last week, or the work session discussion about the work plan. And I was not at the meeting, but I know there was some conversation about adding some kind of missing middle housing conversation or information to the work plan, and I just wanted to add my voice to those who would like to include that in the work plan.
All right, thank you. Are there other comments from anyone? If not, let's move on to the report of the city manager. Mr. Shields?
If I could note, Ms. Hardy.
Oh, I'm
has
sorry,
a
I didn't
virtual
see.
hand.
Letty, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand up. Ms. Hardy?
Can you hear me okay?
We can now, yep.
Okay, sorry, it's a little like the unmute button slowed again tonight. I had two things. One, Mr. Shields, could you just follow up over email on the status of the Gresham Place light? I know some of our residents have been inquiring about that. Second, in light of the public comment we received from residents on Rosemary Lane, I'd like to get a status update. Maybe we can just schedule it for a future work session on our traffic calming projects. I think it's probably been a while since we talked about where we are with those. And then lastly, I think we're looking at 2 more council meetings before recess in August. And Wyatt, if we can have a discussion or your recommendation rather, maybe before our last meeting on what we're going to do about our local emergency. I wanted to make sure we pencil that in.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Shields, you're up. Your city manager report to council, please.
Thank you, Mayor Charter, members of council. I'll hit a couple of items and with fairly brief comments on them. One, I do want to just alert the public to next week's event, a walking tour of Park Avenue, and that will be a convening at 7 p.m. at the Mary Riley Stiles Library, just in the area, just in the front of the library. And we'll have a walking tour that will start there to discuss the engineering plans for Park Avenue and the undergrounding of utility wires, the enhanced pedestrian safety facilities, the new landscaping, and the streetscape for that stretch of street. We'll also discuss bike facilities for that section of street. So all are welcome, and invitations have gone out to all boards and commissions, and direct outreach to the people who live on the street or work on the street, so that we can have as much engagement as possible in this planning and actually in the actual design of the work that will happen in the coming year plus once the plans are finalized and construction begins. I do have two notes on traffic signals, one on Gresham Place and the other at Hillwood and Annandale. I'll start with Gresham Place. Just very briefly, we have had higher level engagement with Arlington County Engineering on that signal. There is a pretty firm stance by Arlington County that the current configuration, which has been brought to our attention, is not being desired by the residents of Gresham Place, is for the safe operation of Station 6. The county's view is that the current configuration is the technically correct configuration. So we will now need to engage in some discussions about some possibly new infrastructure that would go at that intersection longer term to resolve the ongoing concerns from that neighborhood. Secondly, with respect to Hillwood, and I will provide a more thorough report on this, and we'll also get back with the neighbors on timeline and options for that. On Hillwood Avenue, the signal at Hillwood and Annandale is controlled by an older generation controller, and it has gone on to sort of a blinking mode because that signal controller is not working properly. Today, it's very difficult to get these parts, and to put in a new box, we'll put in an order, and that will take a number of weeks. So Hillwood Avenue and Annandale, at least for the time being, will be on flash mode, and that is a very busy intersection, and so we'll manage that to the best extent that we can and have more public communication for the public to know what to expect at that intersection. But that condition will need to be in place for possibly as long as 2 months as the new equipment comes in, and this is part of kind of nationwide shortage of that type of equipment that we're dealing with. We're trying to find other solutions in the meantime. Secondly, another area of service that we need to let the public be aware of, and with respect to trash pickup, and we do have a contract with ADS, is the city's contracted trash hauler, and ADS is experiencing frequent turnover of its drivers and its pickup crews. And as a consequence, in their service area, which includes the City of Falls Church, there are frequent missed pickups. So I want to thank OCOM for getting information out whenever that does occur. And our contract manager is Lonnie Marchetti with the city's Department of Public Works. She's been deeply engaged in trying to get ADS to improve its performance. ADS has assigned a second supervisor for the Falls Church area, and we do expect improvement. But that is something that many of our residents have been experiencing over the past several months, and we're working very hard to address it with our contract hauler. But if your trash is missed, there's a number you can call to report it, and then we will make sure that that trash is then picked up the next day or that afternoon if possible. I will also now respond to a couple of the comments that were made. One, we did get a letter on dogs on tennis courts, so we are posting signs just reminding users and residents that we do have no dog rules for our tennis courts, and we'll post fairly gentle signs, but we just want to let the public be aware that that is the city's regulations with respect to tennis courts. It does interfere with the other users of the courts, and so it is something that we'll try to work with the neighborhood to get that addressed in a gentle way. And with respect to the council work plan, we have had a briefing with the Planning Commission on the work plan, and that discussion of missing middle housing was a comment at the Planning Commission as well. I've discussed that with staff and what a recommendation would be to get through the T-zones item, because that process has started, and then after that we would then shift to the next zoning code amendment and this accessory units and other housing, other regulations with respect to single-family home regulations can be on our agenda, and we'll discuss that when that comes back. I think the council will have one more look at the council work plan prior to adoption on August 8th, and so we'll have that discussion then. I will stop my report there and happy to answer any questions.
All right, any questions or comments for Mr. Shields? Mr. Duncan?
So let's go back to that Gresham Place thing. That doesn't sound good. I mean, you know, if you're leaving that space right now, you're coming out of Gresham Place or even out of the office building, you really are taking your life in your hands, because the predictability of the light is just very difficult. So when you say we're going to install new equipment or something, I mean, that sounds like something that could take years. We're already going to be doing the North Washington Street program in 2026 and 7, and that's good. But are you telling us that we're going to tell the folks at Gresham Place that the conditions that they had there for so many years that worked fine are not going to be able to return until we get some kind of new equipment? I mean, what's the time frame?
What would need to be done is to separate that signal at Gresham. Currently, it's on the same controller as Westmoreland. And so to change this configuration, we need to put in a new controller, which has these supply disruptions that I just mentioned. And I think we can keep the same mast arms, so I don't think it's a complete redo of the intersection, but it probably is about a $100,000 investment. These boxes are very expensive, about $60,000 a piece, and then plus other associated improvements with it. So that is, we're working through the details of that and the timing for that, but I think that is, if we're going to solve this problem, that's what it's going to take.
Okay, well, that's helpful now. So the strategy is we're going to get a new control box and separate that signal from Westmoreland and somehow work it out with Fire Station 6 that they're still going to have the override to get it in or out. But that in any other normal circumstance, the folks at Gresham would have some time at least. I think the 8 or 10 seconds was the previous free time that they had, and will be restored using that method. Is that how I explain it to folks who ask?
Well, we'll get back with the neighbors and explain it directly, and I might misrepresent it myself. But the bottom line is, after trying to take it all the way up the line of chain of command with Arlington County, they are very firm that for the safe operation of the station, the current configuration is what they are recommending. So to change it, we need to make some fundamental changes to that intersection. Now, the very positive news that was reported out this past week is that NVTA has approved funds for that entire North Washington corridor to improve pedestrian safety and complete street improvements. But that is 6 years out. And so I do think that this $100,000 investment is likely to be a cost-effective investment to cover us that 6-year period until the more permanent designs are finished.
Okay, thank you for that further explanation.
All right, Mr. Snyder?
Sure, thanks very much. A couple quick things, Wyatt. I agree with Councilmember Hardy, who asked for a kind of a review of all the traffic calming and the highway safety issues that we received again, and asked that we move on that as quickly as we can. Also suggest to other members of council that we write a letter to the Arlington County Board and ask for a high-level review of the Gresham Place light to see what it is that that can be done to make the access to Washington Street more safe and readily available for our citizens without sacrificing the safety of any other users, and certainly the fire station. The second issue is questions were raised by a speaker tonight about the development with the universities, and I assume that answers will be provided in due course. But I must say that any unsupported allegations are not appreciated. Legitimate questions are, and I ask that we provide answers to those questions in due time. Finally, with regard to missing middle housing, I think we ought to look at options beyond those which we're looking at so far to deal with that. For example, requiring missing middle issues be addressed in large-scale developments that are on the drawing board and that we may still be able to influence. And so I would ask for additional options beyond those which we've seen in place or presented so far to address the so-called missing middle issue. So thank you very much for the opportunity to make these comments and ask these requests. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments from anyone? Okay, let's move on then to business on the agenda. Madam Clerk, will you call the first item, please?
Yes, our first item is a public hearing and second reading on TO 22-13, ordinance to approve the acquisition of property owned by Virginia Tech, Fairfax County Tax Map 0403-01-0092, to approve the conveyance of that property and the property owned by the City of Falls Church, commonly known as the Virginia Tech Northern Virginia Center, Fairfax County Tax Map number 0403-02-0092A, to Converge Westfall Church LLC, and to approve the terms set forth in the purchase agreements.
All right, Mr. Shields, are you doing the staff report, or who's going to be doing that tonight?
I will do the staff report, and I've got a few slides to help us walk through some of the material. The beginning part of the material will be familiar to the City Council. We've reviewed it before in the past, but we'll end the presentation with updates on changes to the agreement that have come about from council feedback and from Planning Commission feedback over the past couple of weeks. Cindy, next slide. So just to get ourselves oriented in terms of what we're talking about, the land in question is Parcel 1 and Parcel 2 together. Parcel 1 is owned by the City of Falls Church and leased to Virginia Tech under the terms of a 40-year ground lease. Parcel 2 is owned by Virginia Tech. It was originally purchased by the University of Virginia and then transferred to Virginia Tech. The total site is 7.41 acres. Next slide, please. The land that is subject to what we call Parcel 1 in the prior map, the 5.33 acres, is subject to a 1995 ground lease. And in that ground lease, the City of Falls Church is the lessor, and the tenant was originally University of Virginia and Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech, as I just noted, bought out University of Virginia's interest in 2018. The term began in 1995, and the 40-year ground lease expires in 2035. Next slide. A couple of provisions in the ground lease that are relevant to these discussions. Section 2.03 provides an option to purchase beginning in 2021 for the price of $2.85 million. Virginia Tech has formally put the city on notice that they intend to exercise that option. While that option was pending, this revised plan with Converge LLC came forward and that is the preferred option than Virginia Tech simply exercising its option at the present time. Section 3.2 does lay out use restrictions, and those include education and government uses only. And so what is contemplated here are residential uses as well as the corporate headquarters, and so that does reflect the higher price that is being contemplated right now. Under the ground lease, there is contemplation of sale to a third party, and in which case the universities would pay 33% of the adjusted value to the city, and 2/3 would remain with the universities. Next slide, please. So a couple of the key terms, and I'll discuss some of the updated terms that are a result of some of the input that we've gotten. Key terms are that Virginia Tech would transfer the full site to the city. That's the 7.41 acres that we saw at the beginning of this presentation. And then the city would sell the site to Converge Westfall's LLC for a $25 million purchase price. I will note, as was noted by the speaker earlier, when I described this back in April, right when the term sheet had just been discussed, I used the word appraisal, and that was not the accurate word. However, I do want the public to know that the city council and city management has benefited from commercial real estate advice over the years, and including the recent transactions with respect to the 10-acre site. And that's very seasoned and very experienced commercial real estate advice, which has guided us through numerous important transactions. And so we didn't go into this without advice. We would never do that. We did this with a party that was very experienced in these types of transactions and valuing these transactions based on the proposed uses, and has a position that has earned the city's trust through the years. $8.43 million would come to the city. That's the 1/3 share, and then $16.57 to Virginia Tech, the 2/3. Now, Virginia Tech, when it bought out UVA's share of the property, they paid $8 million in 2018, and UVA is no longer a party. It is contemplated that there will be one closing. Essentially, they would be simultaneous or all occur on the same day, these various transfers that I've just described. Next slide. So we'll discuss now the proposal that's on the table from Converge Westfall's LLC, and they include a new corporate headquarters for HIT contracting and the amount of 240,000 square feet. That's the minimum site condition. That would include, in that 240,000 square feet, a new Virginia Tech National Center for Smart Construction. They would take up a minimum of 40,000 square feet in that corporate headquarters building. 440 apartments are contemplated with ground floor retail, and the completion of Westfall's Station Boulevard is part of Converge Westfall's proposal as well. That is an interest of the city to have that road put through, and it's an interest that I think all the parties are aligned with, Fairfax County, Virginia Tech, all the parties. Next slide. So this is a graphic that basically shows the Westfall's Boulevard going through the property. And the city's 10-acre development, which is under construction right now, is on there closest to the corner of Haycock and Broad Street. If you follow the cursor, those are being marked right now. And then the Virginia Tech site is the next in line, and the corporate headquarters would be closest to the Meridian football field, and the residential units with retail on the ground floor would be along the Haycock Road frontage. Westfall's Boulevard would then continue down towards Westfall Station. It does take a left to head towards the Metro Rail Station, Westfall Station, but also traffic can continue on and hook up with Haycock Road, and that is a very important part of the transportation network that is being built and was originally, part of the city's vision for effective transportation management on the overall site. The Westfall Station property is going through its land use approvals with Fairfax County at the moment, and that is a separate transaction that would be with WMATA, the owner of the property today. Next slide. So a couple of key milestones and dates that are contemplated in these purchase and sale agreements. One is tonight, where the City Council will hold a public hearing and give consideration to authorize the city manager to execute these agreements on behalf of the city. If that is done, then what would commence is a 90-day feasibility study, a feasibility period in which the Converge LLC, which is backed by Rushmark Properties, would conduct environmental reviews and prepare their plans for submittal to Fairfax County. The Fairfax County land use application is contemplated to be in January 2023. And then closing, the outside closing date is March 31st, 2025. It is contemplated that that will be sooner than that, but that again is the outside closing date. In the milestone schedule, Westfall's Church Station Boulevard would be open to the public in March of 2026. Importantly, the road construction would be in advance of the completion of the improvement of the office building and the residential units. So the road would be open to the public before certificates of occupancy are contemplated to be issued for those buildings. Next slide. The Planning Commission did meet to provide its recommendation to the City Council on July 20th, last Wednesday. They have recommended approval, and they also asked for some additional consideration. One, that the Planning Commission be provided an opportunity to review and comment on plans before they're submitted to Fairfax County. That would be in that sort of during the city's approval process before the plans are formally submitted to the county. And they also recommended changes to give the city greater rights on material modifications during the county land use process. So those were two comments that the Planning Commission formally made in its motion. The full text of the motion is in the staff report associated with this item. Next slide. So I'll review a couple of the changes, and I'll wrap up my presentation. One, the developer has confirmed they'll come to present plans to the City Falls Church with any applicable governing bodies that the city may elect to have attend. And so we can discuss who we want to refer it to, or we could have joint meetings with multiple boards and commissions to review the plans as well. That's in Section 60 of the revised PSA. Next slide. So city approval of plans. Now, there was discussion the last time about the I think it was a 10 business days approval time. And we had articulated that we anticipated that these plans would be presented to us on multiple iterations well in advance of that. There are now two formal approvals that the city will have. One is during the feasibility period. In that first 90-day window, we'll have a chance to look at the plans, and we'll give thumbs up or thumbs down to them at that stage. And then right before submittal to the county, kind of the final plan submittal, the city will also have a chance to review them a second time. It's clear, laid out clearly that, what the purpose of this is to ensure that the height and location of buildings and the design of the roads are satisfactory to the city. We've added some more detail beyond just the minimum site conditions that were listed earlier. And there's a 15 business day approval period for each of those two steps. Next slide. Now, after the applications are submitted to the county, what happens if there are material changes after that time? And so that was originally in the PSA, but they've been clarified a little bit. So changes to the minimum site conditions, which was a pre-existing part of the language, or to the location of the buildings would be a material change requiring the city's approval. And that specifically references any change that would reduce the distance of the buildings relative to the Meridian School. City approval should not be unreasonably withheld or conditioned or delayed. So I want to note that that provision is in there as well. There is a kind of a provision of good faith that's written into these PSAs, that throughout these discussions that there would be good faith communication and consideration of the city's views as it goes through the county's process. I will note that the developer has been concerned about having the city kind of have recurring approval rights as they're going through the county's approval process. That would be a lot to manage. The county will have a very detailed and thorough review process. We also, I think, are relying on a degree of good faith between the city and the county, which we've demonstrated with each other on all developments that occur on each other's borders. Next slide. So this is the last slide that I will present, and this gets to road timing and guarantees. This is one that the county, city, Converge LLC, and Virginia Tech are all aligned on, and that is completing the Westfall Station Boulevard. So during the feasibility period, we will develop a road agreement, and in that agreement, we'll have the kind of the additional language, which is in bold and underlined. That agreement will address timing of the design, approval, and construction and operation of the road, as well as performance bonds and other guarantees for the completion of the road. So that's a summary of some of the terms that I know that have been of interest, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you very much. Let's go ahead and open it up to questions or comments from council. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Mr. Shields? All right, Ms. Conley, then Mr. Duncan.
Thanks for that report, Mr. Shields. I just want to confirm something you said at the very beginning that Mr. Rothstein brought up, that there's no need for an independent appraisal because we had a trusted advisor look at the property and give us advice on that. A trusted known advisor who has given the city excellent advice over the years.
Yes.
Is that a way to phrase that?
I think that's a good way to phrase that, yes.
Okay. And my second question is, have you worked with the school board or the school staff on this area related to Meridian High School?
We have, school staff are aware of this, and they are very interested in looking at the plans when we get to that point. And so that's where kind of our more detailed engagement will be.
Okay, and then my last piece is just regarding the road. A huge part of our development plans for our own 10-acre site include the fact that that road goes all the way to the Westfall Church Metro Station. It was named that on purpose. So I'm glad that those additional requirements are in there to ensure that that road does get built.
Mr. Duncan and then Mr. Snyder.
Just want to thank Ms. Connolly for calling attention to that. So the quote I wrote down was that we relied on serious and seasoned advice from an analyst who's guided us through a number of earlier transactions, earning the city's trust. That seems satisfactory to me. I did have a chance to listen to the Planning Commission's consideration of this last Wednesday in Mr. Shields' presentation to them. They gave it their usual thorough and lengthy analysis. It was very interesting to hear, how they looked at this from a fresh angle, and what they asked for is reflected in the presentation that you made. So somewhere between not giving the city a recurring authority to approve and relying on the goodwill, as you said, that's been built up is where this is going to land. We're not going to have recurring approval authority, but we are going to rely and expect on a relationship that we've fostered over many years now, continuing to bear fruit and yield a product that will be satisfactory to both jurisdictions and all residents of the area when the final day is done. That's how I interpret what I heard from the Planning Commission. And, a couple of the points that are of particular interest are going to be the height of the buildings, buildings that are nearest to our high school that the community can expect, we will be very keenly interested in. So I think that's all I wanted to say. I just wanted to thank the Planning Commission for giving it careful scrutiny and thank the manager for coming up with language that reflects responses to the current concerns that they raised.
Mr. Snyder?
Thank you. So a couple questions. I want to focus on the residential component for a minute. Could we go back a couple slides where we're talking about the components of the project? So how many of these apartments are ADUs?
So because this is in Fairfax County, we have not discussed that aspect of the development. Just knowing that Fairfax County does have its programmatic requirements for any development, that that's where we'll be relying on the county. So we have not put into this PSA specific language with respect to ADUs.
Yeah, I guess that's a shortcoming. If we're serious about ADUs, here we're about to sign off on a project with 440 apartments with no commitment for ADUs. So I would hope that issue would be confirmed sooner rather than later. Secondly, on the road, I appreciate any clarification that can be made to assure that the road will be as intended. It's important to everyone, the success of the project, as well as we heard from neighborhood commentators. So all due clarification on that would be much appreciated. Finally, I think this is an example of addressing missing middle. I don't see why some or all of those apartments couldn't be condominiums and designated as missing middle and meeting the current definition of missing middle. So I think that's a shortcoming of this proposal as well. So thanks very much for the opportunity to make these comments.
Thank you. Ms. Hardy?
Thank you. I was toggling back to the Planning Commission's comments, and Mr. Shields, based on the updates you presented to us, it sounds like the three main bullet points are addressed from the Planning Commission. Would you agree with that?
I think they are, yes.
Okay. And then my second question is more of a clarifying question. So I like the idea of the road agreement that's been proposed or contemplated so far. At the end of the day, I think all of our interests are aligned, but I want to make sure that in that road agreement, it is all four parties. So the county, the city, Converge, and Tech are all parties to that agreement, or is it only some members of it?
So the road agreement, as referenced in the PSA, is really going to be between the city and Converge LLC.
Is this something that we think the county should have a role in as well?
Well, I think that the county has the exact same interest, and so one of the reasons that it was very difficult to get that nailed down at this phase, but where Converge is committing to have it nailed down in the 30-day feasibility study, is because the county wants the same thing, and so we think we can have either complementary or provisions that will get the desired result, and we can do that in coordination with Fairfax County. Certainly, the county, through its rezoning and land use policies and procedures, I think can have a good say in this as well. And so I think between the two of us, and I think the city's road agreement probably will be the first thing, can be the city's guarantee of the desired outcome. There may, the bottom line is I think there needed to be a little bit more time to coordinate with Fairfax County on this.
Okay. I think the point you made about, again, making sure that I think all of our interests are aligned here. And so if the county is not named as part of it, given that they'll have authority under the land use process, that's an important thing to call out. And then finally, while I love Mr. Snyder's sentiment of ensuring affordability and diversity of housing, I guess more of a clarifying question maybe for the city attorney. Do we actually have any statutory authority here, given that it's not in city borders?
We do not have statutory authority to govern this, but because we are entering into a contract, we have some ability to get to contractually obtain whatever we like. But I think Fairfax does have its own program for ADUs, and that each project they review would be subject to that. And so they should probably be the ones who are handling the land use approval to impose any ADU requirements on this project.
Great. And then a final request. And Mr. Shields, I think you hinted to this. So when we have the presentation from the developer the 2 times, we can kind of make that as large of a meeting as we need to, just because we have that 15 business day window. At the minimum, I think it's the planning commission, the school board, and then potentially other boards and commissions will want as part of that process. We'll keep it efficient and tight.
I think that would be a good.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Hiscott?
Yes, I just had questions on the practicality. So if we go into this feasibility study, the 90 days, and we don't come to agreement on the road, or we don't come to agreement on some material term, could you just clarify what our options are to pull back if we needed to, or if we weren't seeing what we believe the deal to be? What are our options, practically speaking?
I think that's in an initial phase of the agreement, is that by the end of the feasibility study, we have to come up with this road agreement, and that ends up being something that is a minimum site requirement under the agreement. So changing it becomes a material modification that we have some say in. So I think that that is one of the things that has to be agreed upon for them to get through to the approval and then have a closing on the sale.
Thank you. So that would be about the road or the height of the building that's closest to the high school. If we came in and saw those plans were just unacceptable, that would be the tack that we would take.
That's correct.
To
Some of
renegotiate
those
that.
major items are minimum site requirements, and if they are changed, the city has more input than it does to just other changes.
Thank you for clarifying that. I think that's a concern of some with this deal, so I wanted to make sure that we all understood that we're not abdicating responsibility and intent for the project. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Leon?
Yes, just one. Mr. Shields, on Section 6 on minimum site requirements, the wording in bold that constitutes a major material change, it only cites location changes. Is there any reason why we don't carry through what the Planning Commission defined as a change, which is height, location, and bulk of proposed improvements? Any reason why we're only carrying one of those 3 conditions of change through for what constitutes materiality in Section 6? And is it a better position if we carried through what was in the feasibility section for change into the material change section, which is 6? Just some consideration there for consistency.
So there are 3 things that are a material modification. One is the minimum site requirements not being met. 2, the relocation of the office building and residential improvements. So that's the moving of the buildings around. And then 3, a material and adverse impact on the project. So they have the ability to determine whether they're going to move forward with such changes. But if they do move forward with such changes, then the city has the opportunity to comment, review on those, and ultimately to approve them. And again, there is this language, seller's approval, that's us, the city, shall not be unreasonably withheld, conditioned, or delayed. So that Section 3 is kind of a catch-all. And so it's not exactly parallel to earlier sections where we talk about a review during the pre-application period, but I think we're adequately covered.
We're covered there? Okay.
Mr. Duncan?
So while we're at this, if I could just ask a couple of specific questions, and if we're too early, if I'm too early with this, just let me know. Somewhere in here, I'm trying to find it, there was a discussion of use of the property for an antenna, wireless structure and so forth. I'm just thinking about Mosaic and how there's an enormous antenna structure, right, smack dab in the middle of the Mosaic district, that I'm always surprised at its presence there, and I guess I would ask if the plans on the land outside our borders included something like that. How would that be viewed as, as we look at the plans now? Is that a material change in kind of what we conceive of going on there, or would that possibly fit into the vision for the site? It's just at such a high point that, that'd be a great place to put a big old antenna structure.
I don't really have a great response to that. It's not part of the minimum site conditions, I can tell you that. I can't really comment on that. I've not heard any contemplation of that being envisioned for the site.
Okay, all right. And second, the tax situation for the Fairfax County part, do we expect them to have their own tax regime that'll be separate and different from our CDA's tax regime for our land, or has that been discussed at all?
I've not.
Special taxing district.
I'm not aware that the county is considering a special taxing district on their in any area of the 40 acres that's in the county.
Okay, all right. Thanks.
Other questions, comments? If not, I've got a few. So if we can, why don't we take a step back so everyone understands kind of how we ended up where we are today. Either the city attorney or the city manager, can you discuss kind of the history? In other words, what happened in 1995? Why was this deal done? Why do we get, the rent we've gotten? Why is this option in here? Could you explain just sort of how we came to where we are today?
So I wasn't here for that. There might be some on council who were, and I don't know if they want to speak, but sort of in broad terms, the city did own this property, and it was, I think, purchased for the use of the high school. It was kind of the long-range vision. The parcel closest to Haycock, the kind of that standalone parcel 2 in the original picture, that got bought by a developer, and they were planning to put townhouse, I think, office condominium on that site. And the city, at that point, UVA and Virginia Tech put out a solicitation to jurisdictions throughout Northern Virginia, kind of a request for sites, because they wanted to build the Northern Virginia Center. So the city took the initiative to put its land forward as a proposed site to UVA and Virginia Tech. And ultimately, that became the selected site. So the terms, we were trying to attract Virginia Tech and UVA to the site. It was something that was very high priority for the Fairfax County as well as the city. And so that was the context for that ground lease. And I think that those were some of the key considerations at that time.
So is this for like economic development purposes? Basically, the notion of bringing a university close proximity to the city would be beneficial to the city?
I think that's right, as well as serving, our members of our community. You want to take advantage of the campus and the learning opportunities there, but as well, having university presence is always a great thing for economic development.
Got it. And so the terms of the lease were struck at 1995 or shortly before that. That wasn't something that recently happened. This option price, those things, those were all set in motion 27 years ago, something like that?
That's right. And it was a long process. I think it started in 1992 and culminated in this ground lease in 1995.
Okay. And so the option, could you describe the option a little bit? Just either, I don't know, the city attorney or Wyatt, you want to do that? Describe the option that the Virginia Tech has?
Okay.
The option that the universities had at the time, and now it's Virginia Tech's option, is to notify the city that they would elect to purchase the property and to pay Now 2.85 million for that property, and the property would be subject to certain restrictions for educational uses and government office uses. And that amount was, 500,000 was paid back when the lease was entered into as a deposit on that price, so it would be 3.35. But the current price would be 2.85, and there would be no negotiation of that price. That is the set price that the city would get at this time, and then Virginia Tech would own the property.
And when was that agreed to? When was that price agreed to?
Back in 1995, when the lease was first agreed to, and it did not have an escalator provision or anything, so.
So 27 odd years ago or so, the price of 2.85 plus 500,000 was agreed
Correct.
to.
Correct.
And if Virginia Tech didn't want to do anything different, or they just didn't tell us they wanted to do anything different, they could go ahead and exercise that option, purchase the property, and we'd have no recourse, would we?
No, we would not have any recourse. We would have to accept that deal. They have, in fact, given that notice, and then these arrangements came up and seemed to provide a good opportunity to have a corporate headquarters and enable the city to get more income from the property and meet everybody's needs for this site, especially as part of all of the development on the high school site, this site, and the WMATA site.
Okay, so if in fact there was no deal, there was no hit construction, there was no construction management site, the city would be getting $5 million less, approximately $5 million less than this deal contemplates?
That's correct. And
Okay.
then the uses on the site would be limited, and since Virginia Tech isn't currently planning to expand its presence here, there might be very little happening on this site for a good while.
So they could just putter along kind of as they do now for an indefinite period of time. And if we wanted at some point, 10 years, 20 years from now, to braze this, we would kind of probably have a fight on our hands, wouldn't we, in terms of trying to figure out what's what and how to go forward, wouldn't we?
Correct, because we would not have our lease interest at that time.
Gotcha. And so in terms of also with respect to this road, if they just bought the property and closed on it under that price which we just discussed, 2.85 or thereabouts, they wouldn't be obligated to build a road or anything, would they?
No, they would not.
So the 10-acre site wouldn't necessarily have direct access through a nice road to the metro station.
That's correct.
So getting the road is helpful to our project, right? I mean, in terms of it
Correct.
adds value.
It's very valuable to our project. It's very valuable to the whole area and the economic development that's happening there, and to opening up some uses that make this site part of the exciting new development on the West End.
I see. And so things like having a corporate headquarters and having customers or students next door, that's helpful, isn't it, to our site and our development and tax revenue on our site?
Definitely. And the Innovation Center the Construction Innovation Center is going to be an interesting development as well. That's part of the corporate headquarters. And a substantial amount of people who would be shopping and coming to use the facilities on our property, where the high school used to be,
Okay.
will benefit us.
Okay, so there are, it sounds like, benefits, not just purely monetary, but non-monetary benefits that will accrue to the city as well through this transaction.
That's correct.
Okay. I'm trying to think of what other questions I might have. Does anyone else have anything else they would like to ask?
I do, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Snyder?
Dave Snyder, thanks. A couple additional questions. So it was really the provision on education uses that's the leverage point for this deal. Isn't that right, City Attorney?
Yes, I think that's correct.
Okay, and that was in the original agreement. Second point I want to ask is, questions have been raised about the finances here, what the city is getting or not getting. Has there been an appraisal, or has there been a third-party sort of validation that this is a good deal for the city?
Well, I think as the city manager discussed before, we did have a third-party advisor assisting us with the value and whether or not this was a good deal. And most of that advice was provided during a period of negotiation over this site and was provided to City Council then in closed session because we did not want to endanger our position in negotiations by discussing that in public. But as the city manager has said, we did have a very seasoned real estate expert helping us look at the values and the uses of the property and all of those aspects.
And so what was the conclusion of that third-party consultant?
The conclusion of the third-party consultant was that this was a good deal in terms of the uses that could be made of this property and the value that would accrue to the city, both from payments as well as from the economic development, the uses to be placed on this property in relation to the property that is being developed by our partner now, that is to the south.
So who gets the tax revenue from this property going forward?
This will go to Fairfax County.
Right. So all the discussion about various financial benefits to the city really begin and end at what we get for this payment. And I guess the question is whether this payment is reasonable under the circumstances. So let me ask our internal staff here, city attorney and city manager, are you recommending that we go forward on this?
I am recommending that we go forward on this for a couple of reasons. One, I think our advisor has told us that this is a fair price. And then two, I think the uses are complementary to what the city's been trying to accomplish on the 10-acre site immediately adjacent. And third, while the road is feasible, if Virginia Tech were to retain its operations there, they would be more difficult, and it wouldn't work quite as well, and it wouldn't also be surrounded by the mix of vibrant uses that we think are complementary to our proposal, to our development. As the city attorney noted, having a corporate headquarters immediately adjacent to our hotel, to our office buildings, to our retail street, those will be very important to the economic performance, I believe, and our modeling, I think, would agree, our fiscal impact modeling, that it is beneficial, certainly is beneficial relative to a slower process or possibly just a continuation of the existing uses for the foreseeable future.
So let me just say once more that I'm disappointed at the failure to include ADUs and or missing middle condominiums in the proposal. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Conley?
One more question, Mr. Shields, and that is, and I don't think we talked about this tonight, there is a requirement that the state approve this also, or the governor approve this? Can you just talk a little bit, where does that fit into the process?
So that occurs during the feasibility
Okay.
study period, and so that is something that Virginia Tech will run that process.
Okay, Virginia Tech will handle that.
That's right. And I was remiss in my comments in terms of my recommendation as well. I do think that the National Center for Smart Construction is a valuable component to this proposal, and having a continued presence by Virginia Tech is something that I've always thought is a favorable outcome as well. Construction technologies are evolving, and I think that is also a very useful thing for our society and for kind of the greater region as well.
Great, thank you.
Any additional comment from anyone? Any questions? Any member of the public wish to speak to this matter?
No.
Seeing none, the matter is closed to the public. All right, do we have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt TO 22-13.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
Ms. Conley on the second. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley,
Yes.
Mr. Duncan,
Yes.
Ms. Hardy,
Yes.
Ms. Leon,
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott,
Yes.
Mr. Snyder,
Abstain.
Mayor Tarter.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries 6-0 with one abstention.
All right, thank you. Let's move to the next item.
Yes, we have TO 22-14, ordinance exempting real property at 208 Gibson Street, RPC 52-309-005, 302 Shirley Street, RPC 52-309-008, 310 Shirley Street, RPC 52-309-012, 312 Shirley Street, RPC 52-309-013, and 310 South Maple Avenue, RPC 52-309-022, from property taxes pursuant to Resolution 2008-47 and Section 58.1-3651 of the Code of Virginia.
Mr. Shields?
Thank you, Mayor Tarter. Ms. Dana Jones is going to provide the staff report. I will just state by way of introduction, what is requested by council tonight is to grant first reading for an ordinance that would grant tax exemption to the 5 quadplexes in Virginia Village, which are currently owned by the EDA, and this tax exemption would take effect only upon transferal of these properties to Wesley Housing pursuant to the terms of a memorandum of understanding that is being finalized right now and which would be before the City Council for your consideration at your meeting on August 8th. So that's what's before Council. The staff recommendation is in favor of the motion. And let me turn it over to Ms. Jones for a more detailed report.
Good evening, everyone. So as Wyatt said, this what we're asking you today is part of the whole Amazon 3 acquisition strike force project that we have, and it's necessary as part of our financing in order for us to get the financing that we need for this project to work. And so we are in the process of having a memorandum of understanding with Wesley Housing. As you are aware, that will be before you August 8th. After we have a final memorandum of understanding, that's why we're asking you to take this action after that MOU is finalized. And so, as Wyatt said, what we're asking is for council to grant by exemption, by designation, for real property taxes, to get a real property tax exemption for Wesley Housing. And this is possible for qualifying nonprofit entities subject to restrictions. And we have the ability to do that based on our resolution 2008-47 that the City Council adopted in 2008. And they also adopted criteria at that time, which Wesley Housing has met in their application and states. And we are looking for a second reading, which will be scheduled after the property transfer. We're targeting everything for September 12th, if we are able to get all of the documents, everything done at that time. So at that time, we will have all the legal documents, the advertising, posting, everything that needs to take place will happen at that time. And as we said last week, we attached Wesley Housing's application for the tax exemption. Currently, the city is not getting taxes on the property because we are the owners of the property. And this, we are looking at this as being part of the city's contribution to make this project work. So as you know, Wesley Housing is a nonprofit. Their mission is affordable housing. They have many years of experience in this, working for low to moderate income households. And so that is, and they also provide services to residents when they will be the property managers. And so if you look in your staff report, we kind of talk about what the cash flow of those 5 Virginia properties would be without property tax payments and what they would be with property tax payments. And so, and we also have questions and answers here for you that kind of explain how the process would work. So are there any questions I don't want to repeat what we said last week, but I just kind of want to give you a brief overview. Are there any questions for me?
All right, any questions, comments for Ms. Jones, Mrs. Jones?
And also, I forgot to add that Wesley Housing is here as well, if you have any questions for them. Shelley Murphy is here. She is the executive director of Wesley Housing. She's also here.
Mr. Snyder?
Sure, thank you. Thanks for all the work here. A couple quick questions. Is this essential to making the larger partnership with Wesley work financially?
Shelley, do you want to take that question since you're there?
Sure. Yes, it is. I think Dana is showing you the cash flow with and without the tax relief. And you can see that because of the low rents that are currently charged and the low income of most of the people who are currently living there, the properties are underwater without the tax abatement.
Okay. The second question I ask is, for how long is this tax abatement being agreed to? In other words, if we agree to, for example, in the future, a larger scale development, would the tax exemption be reconsidered, especially if that were a mixed-use project that with revenue generating capability?
We would have to revisit at that time. This tax abatement request is for these 5 properties.
And I would note that it runs with Wesley Housing, so it would be tied to our MOU and our covenants that the tax exemption is tied to the purpose of this affordable housing project with Wesley as the owners. In a redevelopment project, it depends on who the owners and what the partnership and the outcome is, and it would be, as Ms. Jones indicated, revisited then. And just to be clear and transparent, these are indeed for the 5 properties that are currently owned, but as we know in the overall picture of the redevelopment plan, we do intent of using the acquisition strike fund to purchase additional properties, and so the same request would be brought forward to council from Wesley Housing. I anticipate to make the cash flow in the project work for the long-term bigger picture of consolidation of the 20 properties at Virginia Village.
I guess let me ask the question again. In the case of a large-scale redevelopment, do these tax abatements sort of run with the property, or are they subject of being eliminated if not necessary in the future? And by singular action of the city, or would it have to be agreed to?
Let me just jump in and say that this type of tax exemption is only available to the nonprofit owner for whom it's approved. So in the event there was a redevelopment, one would assume there would be a different owner, and that whether there could be an exemption, that exemption would have to be enacted by council if there was an entity that was eligible under these statutes.
Okay, but if there's no change in ownership, I guess the question I'm going is, when do we have the ability to review this?
Well, I think you would have
Are we granting it, is the action that we grant tax exemption permanently on these projects or on these properties, regardless of what happens to them in the future?
No. To the extent there's any different owner or different circumstances, different uses, then that would come before you, and the exemptions would effectively end unless you approve them if there were any change in circumstances. And you would have to approve them based on similar findings that it's a nonprofit entity and the property is being used for charitable and benevolent purposes.
I guess let me be more specific. Is this tax exemption terminable when we in the city determine that we want to terminate it?
Yes, I believe council could act to terminate it, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments, questions, Mr. Duncan?
So in answer to the question that Mr. Snyder raised, for my money, the language in line 58 through 60 is relevant. It says Wesley Housing will apply for tax exemption for any additional properties obtained under the terms of the MOU, but that will be the subject of separate applications and ordinances as appropriate. I'm assuming, based on what I've just heard, that not only in the instance of additional properties being obtained by Wesley, other quads, but in fact, if there were a redevelopment proposal that included especially mixed use uses, that would be the subject of a separate application and ordinance as appropriate by whatever council was in charge when that application or activity came forward. Is that right, Madam City Attorney?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions or comments? I would just make a generic comment, not really specific to this transaction, but just in general, I think we need to be careful about granting exemptions from taxation so that we don't open the floodgates. And so I would just, not necessarily in this particular transaction, but in general, that we need to, as we have been in the past, I think careful when we do grant these. So anyway, that's all I've got, is just a simple caution for what it's worth. Do we have any public comment? Does any member of the public wish to speak to this matter? Seeing none, the matter is closed to the public. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move to grant first reading to TO 22-14, schedule second reading and public hearing for after acquisition of the property by Wesley Housing and authorize advertisement of the same according to law.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Second.
Ms. Hiscott on the second. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leon?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, council.
Thank you. Let's keep moving. Consent agenda.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us this evening. Let's move on now to the consent agenda. Does anyone wish to remove any item from the consent agenda? If not, do we have a motion regarding the consent agenda?
Move to accept the consent agenda.
Second.
And Ms. Leon in the second. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leon?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's move on to business not on the agenda. Any standing regional committee or council liaison reports? Ms. Hiscott?
Yes, I just wanted to, along with Carol, give a quick update on the Community Development Authority. The bond pricing date was July 13th, and the closing date is anticipated to be the 27th. So these are the bonds that will, secure our 10-acre investment. And Carol, if you could just give an update on the, 16 sets of documents that have been reviewed by City Council prior to, but we've got most of them signed and prepared through a tremendous amount of work from city staff.
Sure. On the Community Development Authority, as Ms. Hiscott said, the expectation is that closing will be Wednesday, and Ms. Hiscott did a lot of signing of documents last week as the CDA chair. Others also contributed, such as Ms. Heath and the finance folks. But we are expecting that the bonds will be issued on Wednesday, and the city will be reimbursed for a lot of outside counsel expenses and bond counsel expenses that we have incurred to get the deal to this and get all the papers ready for this bond issue. So that'll be beneficial to the city. And then the developer should be able to begin using the funds out of the CDA bond issue to help pay the costs of the public improvements in the district. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them, but that is about to happen, and that's really the sort of echo boom of after the lease closing, but this will really close that up, at least from my workload perspective. And we will be able to move on to other things. But I know the project is proceeding, and Mr. Millard is working hard on that from the city's perspective.
All right, thank you. Mr. Snyder, you've got your hand up?
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of things. First of all, I want to again recognize the combined work of our citizens and staff on the North Washington Street project. It's a large project, it's exciting, and it's a few years down the road, regrettably, but I think we can start our planning now. And hopefully part of that will be planning for the bus rapid transit. For folks who have never been through a regional funding process, it's very interesting with multiple steps and a lot of criteria that have to be met. So it's been an honor to work with others to achieve that success, and we'll be working on more in the future. The second question is regarding the Gresham Street light. I suggested early on that maybe the mayor or there be a joint letter from City Council urging that be reconsidered. I'm wondering if there's any objection if we ask the mayor to send a letter to Arlington County Board asking for that. It would appear that the discussion between staffs has not ended up with a win-win. Am I correct, Mr. City Manager, that that's where we sit right now?
So maybe we could follow up on this and have just a discussion so you could hear it directly from the Public Works Director and get kind of the technical background on this, and then take appropriate steps from there.
Okay. I'm also interested in two other areas of transportation. One, electric vehicle charging stations, and I'm wondering if we can have a report in an upcoming meeting. That's a major regional issue, and I want to make sure that we're getting everything out of funding that we can for electric charging stations for electric vehicles. I think those were the comments I wanted to make tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Conley?
Thanks, Mayor Charter. On the consent agenda was the authorization of the Northern Virginia Workforce Area Consortium Agreement. And I just want to note that we do not have a citizen representative on that Workforce Investment Board at the moment. Robert Bartoletta served in that role for a long time and sent us regular updates, and he has stepped down. So I'd just like to put a plea out to the community. If you're interested in workforce issues, this is a good board, and we do need someone on that board. And another question, no, just a statement here, is that I am serving as the vice chair of the Virginia Municipal League Human Development and Education Committee. We just had our meeting last week to prepare a statement, and there were some of the issues that they're talking about are jail per diems and how VML is going to respond to lab schools. So interesting issues, and they'll all be addressed at the conference in October, I believe. And there's going to be a vaccine clinic in the city Wednesday and Thursday for small children, 6 months old to 5 years old. This is the, I think, 7th vaccine clinic in a school in Falls Church, and we are working with Joe Carter to get the word out to the city, but there are still some spots available either Wednesday or Thursday for 2.5 to 5 year olds, or 6-month-old to 5 year olds. And then my last question, which I should have asked earlier, I got a question from someone about door-to-door solicitors, and what are the regulations, and how do you, what are good ways to handle door-to-door solicitors? Do they have to have some kind of permit in the city to to go door to door?
Probably the smart thing for me to do would probably get back with you on this. My quick response is you're not allowed to go in the city door to door to sell things. If you're going door to door to canvass on a First Amendment right free speech thing, that is something that you're allowed to do. But let me get like if you were canvassing for a political office,
Right.
or if you were representing a nonprofit and providing people information and even soliciting donations for that nonprofit, I think that is not covered under the sort of the business license requirements. But selling vacuum cleaners
Verizon
or-
upgrades or magazines
Right.
or fuller brushes or whatever it is.
So, like, commercial activities are generally not allowed door to door.
So what do people do in that situation? That's the question. Is there some guidance we can give people?
Let me get back
Okay.
on that. I think it would be something that the Commissioner of Revenue could follow up
Oh,
with
okay.
from a business license perspective, but also, it's also, I believe, in the zoning code. But let me do a little bit more research on that.
Whenever that research is done, it would be good to put some kind of information out to the public that, just because people are concerned, and during summertime, there are a lot more people knocking on doors, especially in my neighborhood. I don't know if other people have that situation, but we get a lot of door knocking. And then my last thing is related to the check fraud that has occurred in the city. Has there been a message that's gone out to the community warning people to be alert to that could happen to them as well if some of the mailboxes are compromised?
So in our press release, we did note that. We are working with the U.S. Postal Service for a joint statement on this, and so I think that is being finalized, but we hope to get that out. That is an important message, so let
It
me
really
just take the
is.
opportunity to say it. The city fell victim to having its mail that had been mailed at the post office box right in front of City Hall. That box was broken into, that mail was taken, and the checks then were what is called check washing, where fraud is committed. And so that is something that all people should be aware of and take their mail directly to the post office as opposed to using these boxes. Once we've learned more about it, this is a regional phenomenon and a national phenomenon. And so that is their advice right now, and the USPS, I think, will be working with us on a PSA on that.
Thanks.
Of course, Mr.
May I
Deca.
ask, was the box actually broken into, or did somebody have a key and it was an inside job? Or do we know, or can we say?
So I don't know the specifics. There is an investigation. In the more general reporting on this phenomenon, the keys have been stolen and then are sold on the black market, and then the wrong people have those keys and they just open the boxes. But that's actually kind of what's being printed in the public realm about one of the ways that this is done.
Yeah, sure.
Couple of scheduling things. Since we're walking, not sitting next Monday when we meet, this is the last time we'll be together until the 8th of August. Are we doing a mayor scheduling meeting this coming Wednesday, or not this Wednesday and then the next Wednesday?
I'm sure we've given it much thought. Maybe we don't need one this Wednesday. Are people okay skipping it? Although there is the ask the council is afterwards. So I'm indifferent. If people want to cancel it, I'm fine with that. I'm going to still be up here for ask council. I guess, what time is that, 9 or 9:30?
Scheduled for 9:30.
9.
Yeah, scheduled for nine.
I think it's 9. I can look at the.
Just send us an email reminder of that if you don't mind, whenever you figure it out.
So if we go ahead and
Why
meet,
don't we cancel it then?
okay, so cancel the scheduling meeting, but you guys are going to go ahead with a meet the council type thing? Okay. All right, whatever. Usually at the meeting before I draw up the agenda for the Economic Development Committee, I'll just run that by everybody, and so this would be, I guess, the last meeting before the August 4th Economic Development Committee meeting. I had a conversation with Becky Witzman today just to go over some, points and stuff, so if there's anything in particular that we should or should not talk about, maybe you could share that with me, Mr. Manager, since we are not doing a scheduling meeting this Wednesday. Might help for me to know that. And I just wanted to call the public's attention to the fact that the Economic Development Authority is having a special meeting on next Tuesday, is that right? To discuss the Wesley MOU and the theater SE agreement modification for Founders Row.
And the Economic Development Agreement modification. Yes, I think that's what you said, yes.
Yeah, that's what I meant. So that goes Tuesday, August the 2nd at 7 o'clock, I think. If the public's interested, there'll be notifications of that meeting.
In person or virtual?
I actually don't know. I know several members are going to be out of town.
I believe it's virtual. I think I got a request for that.
Yeah, I think it's virtual. Okay, thanks.
Oh, Madam Clerk.
I just wanted to let everybody know that the Ask the Council session is like an open office hours that some council members come to City Hall. You can come in person 9 a.m. on Wednesday, the 27th, here in the Dogwood Room in City Hall. There is also a link so the public can join virtually if they can't make it in person, and that's on the calendar on the website. So that's this Wednesday at 9 a.m.
All right, Ms. Hardy.
Thank you. The EDA meeting, I think, well, it's a special meeting. I think it's their regular meeting day and time anyway. I had two quick things. Similar to Mary Beth, I was going to make a plug for vacancies. In particular, I think we're still down one person for the Board of Equalization, which is really important given that we have a large volume of appeals. Also, I think vacancies on the Housing Commission, HSAC, the Library Board, the Rec and Parks. I feel like we have a high number of vacancies across the board. So for anyone who's still paying attention at 9:15 at night, take a look at what we've got. Would love to have more residents volunteer. Second thing, why I think many of us are looking forward to the walking tour next Monday night, and related to, I think, what you talked about at the beginning of the meeting, talking about kind of what the 30% design plans are. If I could make a request, because I know that there's some community swirl already and maybe some misinformation about the loss of parking spaces and some concern over that. Depending on what that 30% design is, because I haven't seen it myself, could we be really clear on what the changes are in terms of adding spaces here, taking away spaces, adding trees, taking away trees, and then if there are alternative options on the table, present that in a very clear way, because I worry that if we're just all talking, we won't capture all the details. And again, I don't want people to be coming away with misunderstanding or concern unnecessarily.
Thank you for that input, and we are having a couple of planning sessions for this walking tour to try to make sure that the information is conveyed as clearly as possible with some good on-the-street markings and things like that, and some of the trade-offs of some of the different options. So that is definitely what we're intending to do.
Terrific. And maybe to be environmentally friendly, we don't need to do handouts, but like if the website can just be updated and everyone's gonna have their phones, so we just scan QR codes and just pull up like the diagrams on our phones and see, that would be fine too. I just want to make sure there's an actual source of information and not just rely on anecdotal concerns. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any further comments? Anything else? What's that? Minutes, yes.
Minutes.
Mr. Duncan.
The minutes of the meeting of Monday, May 2nd, 2022 have been presented to us, and they seem fine with the exception of on line 395. By the time we got to the end of the meeting, Ms. Leon had stopped being Ms. and just became Leon, which sounds kind of menacing. Or Leon, sorry. Other than that, I think the minutes are marvelous and would move approval as corrected.
All right, do I have a second?
Second.
All right, that was Leon who did that. Ms. Leon. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The ayes have it. Anything else anyone wants to say before this gavel falls down? Any final words? Once, twice. All right, everyone take care. We're adjourned.
See y'all next week.